You guys get to enjoy my face for like the next 5 minutes. Have fun. So the piece that was assigned to me was chapter 13 of a book I think called Walden by Thoreau, and its title is Housewarming. Pretty much, housewarming is about a man in his house. Shocker. And in the beginning, it's a man in his home, and it goes through the months, pretty much. The first quote that I'm going to say, already by the 1st of September, I had seen 2 or 3 small maples turn scarlet across the pond. September. And then next, the wasps came by thousands to my lodge in October. And slowly, the narrator gets himself until he's into winter. And it's pretty much showing us like the hardships he deals with having the house that he's in. I think pretty much this book is about him going off by himself to get in touch with himself, like transcendentalism and romanticism, like nature and stuff. And so he's not in the most suitable house, that most well-equipped by any means. And during the winter a few times, he kind of like second-guesses himself and says, I sometimes dream of a larger and more populous house. And he goes in to talk about how his, like the house he used to live in, or like houses he's been in, people like want to be in, and like they'll stay for a meal. But in his house, he rarely can even get anyone to stay for pudding. And that saddens him, because he probably likes people. And then in the 15th paragraph, we see how very masculine he is. It's after he's chopped wood for his fire. Every man looks at his wood pile with a kind of affection. I love to have mine before my window, and the more chips the better to remind me of my pleasing work. He's a man, what can I say? Towards the end of the chapter, we start to see deeper and deeper into this guy's mind. We never really hear his name. It's only one chapter, so obviously somewhere in the book we figure out who he is, but during my chapter, I don't really know who it is. And we start to see how lonely he really is. He's living about 2 miles out of town, I believe, and he's getting pretty lonely. Pretty much, though, the summary in one sentence is a man in his house. Okay. Using specific examples, how does this exemplify romanticism and transcendentalism? Well, this chapter is chock full of it, let me tell you. The biggest thing that comes out to me about romanticism is nature. Nature and poetry. This is full of it. Specifically, he is out here to live off the land. To not have to depend on society and store-bought material. He's here to kind of get to a place where he can survive on his own. And he starts to be able to use the land and, like, appreciate it. And he says, it is so much pleasanter and wholesomer to be warmed by the sun while you can be than by artificial fire. Jericho calls fire artificial. That's rude. But I guess the sun's better. He's saying, headline. Okay. He's saying that the sun is a lot more natural, and he would prefer to have that to warm him and to use than to have to, like, make a fire or whatever. Artificial fire. He's saying the sun is a lot more natural. And he also says, I picked out as many fireplace bricks as I could find to save work and waste. Okay, so pretty much this guy is taking up the task of building himself a chimney. I don't know if y'all have chimneys, but I have a chimney and a fireplace, and it is monstrous. I'm just trying to imagine in my head right now building my own chimney. That's the first problem. Second problem, he's like gathering bricks from like old abandoned houses or something. Like he's not even making his own bricks. So these bricks are possibly pretty weak. So all your work could possibly just tumble and that'd be depressing. But he doesn't care. He wants to live off the land. He wants to not waste. He wants to recycle things. Very romanticism and transcendentalism. There's another quote. Once he starts to plaster his house and put like another layer around as to strengthen it more. I did not plaster till it was freezing weather. I brought over some whiter and cleaner sand for this purpose from the opposite shore of the pond in a boat. So he's not going to go buy plaster, because that would just be crazy. But he goes and is going to make his own plaster from sand. And he's living off the land, he's using the nature, he's trying to be spiritual and, like, use and recycle what God's given us. Once again, very romanticism and transcendentalism. That's a mouthful. Okay. Later, he begins to talk about fire. Now, I enjoy this part a lot. Or at least for my purposes, I enjoy it. He befriends the fire, pretty much. It was I and the fire that lived there. Is a quote that he said. Here's another quote. It's 2 winters. It depicts 2 winters. And the first one, he has a fireplace. And, like, cooks over it. He's all old-fashioned and such. But then, in the following winter, the next winter, I used a small cooking stove for economy, since I did not own the forest, but did not keep fire so well as the open fire. Cooking was then, for the most part, no longer a poetic, but merely a chemic process. OMG, it's screaming about romanticism and rationalism. Okay. So, whenever he had a fireplace and could cook over it and the fire was, like, alive and, like, it was poetic to him. It was like him and the fire were doing this together. It was poetic and alive. But then, whenever he has to, like, condense the fire into a cooking pot, a cooking stove, he thinks of it more as a chemic process. He's not, like, on a team with the fire. He's, like, harnessed the fire and isn't making it do what he wants. In my opinion, whenever he's poetic in cooking with an open fire, it's very romanticism. I feel like a romanticism person would cook over an open flame. But then whenever it talks about the chemic process, that's a much more rationalism. You're using the fire for productivity, not necessarily just to see its beauty. Okay. Why do I think that this piece represents its entire work? Okay. Pretty much this book, I think it's called Walden. I'm not really sure. I'm gonna guess. From Wikipedia. This is Wikipedia's depiction. I'm sorry, but it seems correct to me. It says this book is about immersing himself in nature. Thoreau hoped to gain a more objective understanding of society through personal introspection. Simple living and self-sufficiency were Thoreau's other goals, and the whole project was inspired by transcendentalism philosophy, a central theme of American Romantic period. So, as I can tell, it's pretty much this guy is going off by himself and is going to figure it out by himself. He's going to use nature and poetry and immerse himself in nature. And he wanted to understand society, and he figured doing that by himself and immersing himself in nature was the way to go. And this specific piece, I think, is about him and his house. And the 3 things you need for survival is food, water, shelter. Shelter. And you need shelter to live. And so this part is talking about what his shelter is, what his housewarming is, so to speak. And I feel like that is a very important part of the book, because if you don't have shelter, you're not going to live. And I think it represents the entire story as a whole very well. That's what I think. This is a little over 5 minutes, I'm sorry. Hope you liked looking at my face for a while. Toodaloo!